Hi, Charles.
Hello, Jason.
Thank you for everyone who's been holding on for this one. Sorry, I got the time zone wrong initially on the post and yada, yada, yada. Charles paid me a very nice compliment in the pre-show chat where he's like, he's looking forward to such a professional sounding podcast. I'm like, well, we'll screw that up somehow to disillusion you a little bit, sir. But I do appreciate you coming on.
You're quite welcome. I stand by it. I still think you run a tight ship, and I admire your skill at it. You absolutely have a voice for radio, so I am truly, truly excited to be here. I sincerely am.
A bit of a face for one too nowadays, but my pretty days are done. I've entered into my old married father age, which is maybe we can get to that too. I'll put a pin in that because I think there's something to talk about that too with the taking on roles, especially later on in life, and how that should change a man, and when it doesn't, it's a little bit of treachery afoot. Charles, I always assume everyone knows people in the sphere, but on the off chance that someone is coming in here not knowing who you are, could you give them a little bit of a teal deer on Charles Spadille? Is it Spadille or
Spadille?
Spadille.
Spadille. It's French for ace of spades.
Okay, so forgive me for being more French, more French Canadian with it. Spadille.
No problem. No problem at all. Just to give you the TLDR, I have been in these circles, these circles for quite some time. I started out blogging in 2004 with a personal blog that gained some traction. I'd like to say that I was quote unquote red pill or dissident right long before those two things ever became any kind of formalized movement. Now, I hesitate to use the word formalized movement, but that'll suffice for now. Then after quite a few years of that, I want to say 8 to 10 years of that, I started doing another more formalized red pill blog that's called 80 Proof Oinomancy being divination through wine and alcohol. I started doing that where I talked a lot about social dynamics between men and women, what it was like aging as a man, what it's like dealing with the world as a man, situations. I tried to shy away from politics generally because to me, politics are often very ephemeral. I'm not really interested in red team, blue team stuff very often. I think it's too ephemeral. I try and go to the things that I believe that are the deeper causes of these things, the deeper issues, the more eternal ebbs and flows of mankind. So I try to address those issues. And I've been doing that for quite some time. And then I came into the circle with Dark Enlightenment, a mutual friend of ours. And he was kind enough to introduce me to Pete Quinones, who has become, I'd like to say a friend, but we don't know each other very well in person yet. But I definitely consider him a strong acquaintance and at least an internet friend. I do have a tremendous amount of respect for him. So I've worked with him, and through there, I discussed my growing up in the Northeast of the United States, growing up in diversity in the 1970s, the changing demographics of the United States. I discussed with Pete. Pete and I had a wonderful conversation regarding my history with United States immigration and naturalization, which would later become Department of Homeland Security. So I've talked a lot about that in my past and relationships with men and women, just men's issues in general. That's the TLDR. That's everything in a nutshell that I think might be pertinent to tonight's conversations.
Part of the thing that I want to get to in this conversation, and fans of the show, I won't drone on about Vengeful Son too much. Anyone who's been following me on X or follows the show on the regular knows I've talked quite a bit about it. It's my term for what I believe is a new spirit of the age. And the spirit will be one of sort of a recognition of generational betrayal and a spirit of total violence. Mm-hmm. And when I say that, I don't just mean kinetic. I mean in all forms. Mm-hmm. I've used examples of during the game stonks situation of the 2020 when one of the guys was told, if you keep holding these stonks, you're going to go broke. And he's like, that's not the point. The point is to hurt the hedge funds that hurt my dad. We're seeing this happen now. Of course, in Britain, in the UK, there was a stabbing of 3 young girls, and uh, the situation has turned to violence. One of the outcroppings I've seen now is screenshots of they're calling them redditors, but whoever are swarming the online the British police department with like false reports of things going on. But this is again a tactic, right? This is an aggression. This is a form of violence. I think as Western man who's been divorced from violence for a very long time begins to re-encounter it, it's like a language.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Right. And at first it's foreign and you're kind of just mouthing the words. But as people become more and more expert in it, then that's when things are really going to start kicking off. And I think we're into, I don't know, probably longer than I'll have left on this earth, of an age of tearing things down, rebuilding from the ashes. Many of these things will be good. I think there's going to be some benefits from it.
Yes, I agree.
Of it is, and I'll just say this, and I'll let you go with it, Charles. Is that the danger is it's going to feel good, and the more it feels good, the more it can lead you down some very, very dark roads. Because I'm no massively tough guy, but I'm not bilingual in the language of violence, but I'm I know some words. Right?
Yes, you know the important phrases. Yes,
right. I can get by.
Yeah,
and even by doing that, I understand there's a darkness in there. There's a righteousness and a light, and there's a darkness. So maybe setting that up. Where can you go with that?
Well, a few things I would say. First off, we've talked about this before in the pre-show a little bit. I agree with you 100%. I do think that you're putting it as the way you call it, the zeitgeist, the vengeful son. I think it's very succinct. I think it's very apt, and I think it's very close to being not just metaphorically true, but literally true. I think it is a lot of animosity between parents and children, children and parents, etc. I do believe that very sincerely. And as to speak to your statement about fluency in the language of violence, like any language, the more one uses it, the more one becomes fluent in it. And as you say, the danger there is to start to enjoy using this language. And that is a tremendous danger, because bleeding is easier started than stopped. When people start using this and when they realize just how effective it is, I think that's going to be a danger, really, when people start realizing just how effective this language is. Because I get the sense, and I think I would say it's demonstrable, but I obviously don't have stats on me right here. I'm fortunate to be on Thought Crime Syndicate with Jose Nino, and he's excellent with the stats. I really enjoy having him. But I would be willing to wager that the stats will show that it will only become exponentially used as time goes on. And I think the stats will show that the left already has a certain familiarity with that language that the right does not. And I don't mean to boil this down to red team, blue team, left team, right team necessarily, because I think your words go much deeper to much larger issues, much more eternal issues. But I do think there is an eternal conflict. I mean, I believe it was the Koreans that came up with the yin yang, and I know that the Chinese have latched on to such things. So obviously, conflict, struggle, and these sorts of things have been with humanity since its inception, since its beginnings. So I would say that your statement, just to step back a bit about the vengeful son, I think it's not only metaphorically true, but it's going to be literally true in more cases than not. And I think as the effectiveness of violence is realized, I think more and more people are going to employ it. And I think that's why you say this is just going to start spiraling out, and that more and more people are going to use it. And that's what's going to make it a more durational thing, a more epoch type of violence than just 6 months of riots or some such, if that makes sense to you.
Random username asks, what's the line between violence and protest? Spamming a computer address seems like a protest. I think the difference is that a protest is asking someone else essentially to do something for you, right? Saying that we are gathering together to give you a sense of prescience, like you better do this or else. It's a threat. Where violence is no longer a threat, it's a promise. It's a fulfilled threat. It's instead of asking someone else to do something for you, you're doing it. So when that transfers to the mob or the crowd, and this is a medic Girardian aspect, is that when violence becomes modeled, it will enter into a spiral where it's very hard to get out of it. I always have. This is why I warn people about it. Is that this is how you get Burma. You get Burma, which is or if people are unfamiliar, you get Israel Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
You get a situation where you have two groups who can never be at peace because too many things have happened. It's like when I my disgust reaction was immediate when I heard these apologies for living on stolen land things that started. I heard them in Canada, and now they're here in Australia as well. And one of the things that always rang false to me is that if the premise of this thing is that we've stolen your land and killed your people, oh, we're really sorry. Here's a public apology. In a group, in a meeting group, I first heard it when I went to a thing at McGill College in Canada. It was a information seminar or something, and the speaker stood up and did this whole, sorry, we're living on this stolen land thing. And I'm looked around. There's no Indigenous people in the room, so I don't know who the hell he's talking to.
Right? Yeah, exactly. What is this for?
And it was like, yeah. And I'm like, well, if I was Indigenous, or I'm Ukrainian of heritage, right?
Right.
If a Russian came to me and said, "I'm really sorry about that whole thing," I'm like, well, but you killed all my people.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. I'm not sure your little apology would make that much of a difference.
Right.
Whoops, my bad. I've slaughtered your family. We good, bro?
Yeah.
I don't think that's good. Yeah.
I'll say it again. I'll say it at every assembly. And won't that be better? It's like, no, that's not going to make anything better. Because again, that's an act of violence. And it'd be whether it's historical, cultural, whatever have you. And again, this is like maybe we can really flesh that out. Is like that language of violence, which has been forgotten and which we think of as, we got a taste of the left doing it with the BLM protests, right? Burning down things.
Yes, that's what I was alluding to.
Right, but there's actually, I look at that as like a show. That's like, this is where the left doesn't get it, because the left will encourage others to do some things and will burn things down and almost like cut off their nose to shame their face kind of deal. Whereas when the right gets violent, the right will get righteous, and the right when the right gets righteous, they will get rid of they will liquidate your entire family. Like, there's a huge difference. And again, that may seem like, for a lot of people listening to this, going, yeah, like, well, calm down there, because it's all good. It's all fun and games until it becomes your family.
Right. Well, I would say, I think the only thing that I think I might disagree with you on slightly is, I mean, the communists are known, the communists are known for violence. And I mean, they've look at the Spanish Civil War, look at the Holodomor. I mean, they've liquidated tons of people. As I've written on Twitter and in my first book, to the communists, utopia is always one more corpse away. Utopia is always one more corpse away. If we just keep killing enough of X, we'll get utopia. And that's what they do. Now, that's not to disagree with your larger statement. I do think the right gets righteous, and they do what you say they do. I'm not disputing that they do. I think both of them get locked in their own purity spiral, if you will. Now, one may be more at least according to most faiths on the planet. One may be more actually righteous than the other. We could have that discussion. But I think they both do get kind of locked in their spirals as far as that's concerned. And regarding the BLM riots specifically, I find it interesting that perhaps I have missed a memo somewhere. But to me, what ended the summer of Floyd was Rittenhouse. To me, that's what ended the summer of Floyd. That's what ended the left's violence, because the left finally realized, how do I say this? The left was asking where the bathroom is with violence. Let's see if we want to continue the language metaphor. The left was saying, hey, we know how to ask for the bathroom. We know how to ask for the local gas station. Rittenhouse showed up and wrote an essay worthy of G.K. Chesterton. Okay, in that language. Because what did he do? He killed two of them and almost killed the third. It was at that point, all these people that were showing up to throw bricks, to say, may I swear on this program or no? I don't want to.
Of course you can. Yeah.
Okay. All right. To say, fuck you, Dad. All the people that were doing this to say, fuck you, Dad. Now they realize, holy shit, this is now serious. Because again, they were asking where the bathroom is, and Rittenhouse is writing an essay in the language. And then if you notice, everything suddenly dried up almost overnight. And I would posit, this is my personal take, I would posit that the reason they wanted Rittenhouse crucified, absolutely crucified and thrown into a literal rape cage for the rest of his life, is because they knew if anybody else got wind that they could defend themselves, defend their property, defend their family, then that was the end. And it was. It absolutely was. Because when everybody saw that he was exonerated, or to the left's perspective, what got away with it, and I'm making air quotes like you can see me here. When they saw that, it was it. I mean, they knew it's okay. Well, I guess we can't do this now. Or if we do, we have to realize that it's going to be taken to another level. And I don't think they were ready for that. I truly don't think they were ready for that.
Don Browning in the chat says, now I'm pondering whether Rittenhouse was organic. He was organic.
I believe
the linchpin to this, to a lot of what I'm talking about, is that this zeitgeist, this spirit, will manifest in ways that we're almost conditioned to believe could only happen in a movie. Trump getting shot in the ear, coming back up, face full of blood, pumping his fist in the air, saying "fight, fight, fight,"
right,
which is part of the thumbnail for this episode, or inspired by it. That's organic. There was no production in that.
No.
There was people showing up. It was staged for a murder.
Agreed.
You had all your photographers, top-notch photographers, and all your CNN was broadcasting this thing. Someone, I don't think they knew exactly what was going to happen. Maybe someone did, but I think what more or less is like they got tipped off, like, you really want to cover this one, and with the expectation that you have a JFK.
Yes.
And by God's grace, or by another spirit's grace, or who knows what, that didn't happen.
Right.
And it's now thrown the regime into a complete and total tailspin. To kind of continue on to this with my language, is that it's the sort of spiritual language, is that this election now has now become a referendum on the smothering mother versus the vengeful son. And I think that Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, although perhaps not like the perfect representations of something of this new spirit, are the first entry into this world. It's just like, LBJ would have been the first smothering mother candidate, right? He's a catalyst for civil rights in America, whether you like it or not. And was LBJ the perfect representation of that? No, you have to wait till you get the Clintons, basically. But but it puts into it's the domino effect, right? It's a little tiny the meme, you know, where the little guys like hitting the domino here, and it's
absolutely
like over here. That's where we're at.
Yeah, it's funny you use the domino effect because I wrote a blog post about way back in, I want to say 2014, and I write in a very negative space type of style. That's a photography term where what you don't see in the picture is a huge component of what you are seeing in the picture. What you aren't seeing is a major part of the story. And what I was talking about that in that post was that your civilization has already collapsed. You just don't notice it because it's a big series of dominoes, and it just so happens that the one on your left and the one on your right haven't fallen. That's it. Everything else before them and after them has fallen. You just don't notice it because those two haven't fallen. And when I say left and right in this context, Jason, I don't mean left and right politically. I mean physical left and right. That's all I mean by that. So that's why it's interesting when you bring up the domino effect, because I'd actually written that. As a matter of fact, when I wrote that, there's another fellow. I really liked his work because he went by the handle of Donald Graham, and he did a dissertation on my post, and he broke it all down with charts and everything. It was amazing, and he called it "It's Not the Fall That Kills You." And he went into all about why he agreed with what I was saying, and he investigated all the negative space that I'd left. So when you use the domino example, it's really, really very poignant to me personally, because I'd written that 10 years ago about using the domino as an example. And when you talk about J.D. Vance and Trump, as I believe this term I used on Twitter was, I don't necessarily think this is the vengeful son and his arrival. I think this is the stirrings of the vengeful son. This is, if you will, not an awakened Saxon, but a restless Saxon being plagued by bad dreams. And he's kicking around in the bed, still unconscious, but fitful, if you will, fitful. And I think that this is the stirrings. If you look up the word stirrings, I even went so far as to take a photo of it on dictionary.com and put it there to show just how meticulously I choose my words. It's just the stirrings of the vengeful son. I don't think he has arrived. I still think we have a little bit of time before that happens, but it's definitely, not to mix metaphors, but it's definitely the fitful slumber of the Saxon.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jason Marinchuk, a legal Canadian immigrant living in Australia. I also hate the beach and don't wear shorts in public, which makes me an official and ironic expat. Would you like to be an expat too? Well, I have good news for you. Mikkel Thorup, a highly sought-after consultant and host of the Expat Money Show, has organized the world's largest offshore and online event, the Expat Money Summit. October 7th to 11th, tickets are free. You can create your own financial bug-out bag by learning about international diversification, how to get a second passport, offshore financing, and investing in international real estate, all while getting in-depth geopolitical insights from some very, very smart people, such as Dr. Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Scott Horton, there he is, Tom Woods, Mark Faber, Tom Luongo, and many, many, many more. Go to expatmoneysummit.com and get your free tickets, and while you're there, go check out their sexy upgrade packages. I'll be in attendance. Join us October 7th to 11th, expatmoneysummit.com. Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how it's directed. You know, we're at this very dangerous pivot point in history. A lot's riding on November, because if Kamala's put in, I predict the blood will start running in the streets. If Trump's put in, there might be blood as well. But I think with Trump and PayPal mafia, the things that Matt Erickson's talking about now, that things are being confirmed in the Washington Post, for Christ's sake, if they're in, While there might be some violence and there might be some uprising,
Mhm.
and look, the spirit has to be dealt with. It's coming. It's not
Right.
negotiable.
I think you
I've
say it perfectly. Yeah, I don't think it is negotiable. I
yeah.
think it's going to be here. Please continue.
No, sorry. Yeah, there's ways of counteracting it, but that's down to us. I've said the way to counteract is to model the prodigal son,
Mhm.
and maybe we can get into that, or that's a different show. But um, the the interesting thing will be someone Trump and co. Also have guys like Eric Prince involved, and that he's going to be in the camp in some way, shape, or form.
Mhm.
And I think guys like him want to take that energy and direct it and go off to Africa for adventures or whatever have you.
Mhm.
So whether that, and I'm not saying this is good, bad, or the other thing, but the election in November will decide whether the Vengeful Son is going to be directed inwards into the country
Mhm.
or outwards into someplace else. And you know, uh, it depends on where you're where you're living, really at that point, or how you're living. Um,
Right.
I'm a little bit blessed, and I was saying to in the pre-shows that God has irony in terms of bringing me to a beach town where I hate the beach, but but there are benefits in terms of I really don't have any reason to be afraid down here.
Right.
Uh, you would be watchful. And I am, but uh, doesn't mean you go to sleep. But the chances of things kicking off where I'm at pretty slim. And if it does kick off, I'm pretty sure I can see it coming. It's one of those. It'll be a slow moving train rather than a bullet train.
Right.
Um,
It'll be that steamroller in the movies moving very, very slowly at
right.
you, rather than a high speed locomotive. Yes. Yes. Exactly what I was alluding
Yeah.
to. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, to step back briefly to the Trump and Vance, you were saying that it's going to be violence either outward facing or inward facing. I think really at this point it's to use the old Futurama line, first one then the other. Like I don't
Mm,
think I think to combine that with what you said earlier, it's non-negotiable. I think anything is just another example of kicking the can down the road. If we
mm,
happen to get it to face outward, I've said this on Pete's show many, many times. I am an absolute United States isolationist, so I certainly don't want it to be vented outside. Let me be abundantly clear about that. But I am saying if it does, then it's going to come home to roost anyway. And if it starts
mhm.
here, it'll probably spill out anyway. If for no other reason than the regime has its filthy little paws in so many places around the globe that it can't help but get them smacked. So I really think it's just a matter of first one, then the other. So that would be my statement regarding it.
No, I totally agree with you. I guess the open question would be what would be better,
Yeah.
in a global in a let's say holistic kind of sense. Would it be better to burn through the violence at home first to
Yeah,
kind of get
that's
our yeah.
That's tough. That's tough to say because I mean, when you look, and again, I repeat, I am a tremendous United States isolationist, but reality is what reality is. As my Canadian friend says, I'm very close to, if the U.S. sneezes, Canada gets the cold.
Mhm.
So, and that doesn't apply to just Canada. That's everywhere. So, if we have a lot of violence here at home, how's that going to impact the rest of the world? Probably very poorly. If nothing else, it's going to lead to quite a bit of starvation in quite a few places. It's going to lead to the
Right.
breakdown of a lot of machinery in some places. I realize China has more manufacturing, but I do think that the effects will be felt globally at many levels if serious violence breaks out here. If I really do sincerely believe that, and I think one would be hard pressed to prove otherwise to me.
That's always been my counterpoint to a lot of people who go on about um, this is all a Chinese plot or a Russian plot or whoever have you to destabilize America, bring it down. Like, you do realize that I don't think China and Russia want U.S. to be destroyed or completely destabilized. I'm sure they want to push America off, off their territory, out of their sphere of influence, so they can kind of just do what they need to do without too much interference.
Right.
But I don't believe that either one of them are making any kind of overtures or moves that would make me think that what they really want is for Russia, for America to be destroyed and then to take its place. Like,
I think that's an excellent
I
point,
don't see
Jason.
that.
I'm sorry. I think that's an excellent point, Jason, because first off, I would point out that if I recall correctly, and again, this is why I'm so happy to have Jose on Thought Crime Syndicate so he can back me up here. But if I recall correctly, Russia has an economy roughly equivalent to California. I mean, that's that's what we're dealing with when it comes to Russia. If we're talking about that kind of power at this exact moment, Russia has an economy somewhat equivalent to California. So I really don't think that's any great shake, so to speak, in comparison. So, and China, I really would be surprised if they wanted us to collapse. They may want us to shrink. I absolutely believe they want us to shrink. But where do you think they get all their developments from? Where do you think I mean, it's all just stolen American stuff. Most of your F1 visas, that's for those of your listeners that don't know, an F1 visa is what immigration uses for students from foreign countries. That's how you get foreign students into the United States. If most of their F1 students are just Chinese spies, CCP CCP agents, and they're just doing their internships and stuff to take what we've developed. What would they have if we stopped inventing things? That's where they get everything, pretty much.
Well, I mean, just in terms of investment too. I mean,
Yes.
it's an open secret in China that one of the reasons why Toronto and Vancouver, you can't buy a house there. You buy a shack in Etobicoke for $2.5 million now, is because of foreign investment buying up properties, and no one's even living there. They always make fun of these Chinese cities, or these ghost cities, which is like development cities where they people just buy these properties, but no one lives in these cities. It's like that's becoming downtown Toronto. That's basically Vancouver right now, or Victoria. So it's happening globally. So again, if I was an investor and I had millions, billions, trillions of dollars invested in your company, why would I want to see it destroyed? Even maybe I'm shorting it a little bit too, just to because I'm a cheeky little cunt. But just in case, hey, never know. But at the same time, it's like that doesn't make sense that you actually would want it. Like maybe you're betting you're hedging on it, but you're not like desiring it or championing it. It doesn't make any sense to me. I think that's kind of speak to people who kind of chime in on these channels, on my channel and Matt's, and I'm sure Pete as well. I know Pete as well. Is that people get into these conspiracy theories, and I'm all game to hear any story you want, but I always think it has to comport to a general narrative that's sensible and realistic,
right?
Because otherwise you just sound like an asshole. The new one now is J.D. Vance, of course, is married to an Indian woman who I believe is nominally Hindu, I guess. And there's many people who like to make comments on my on my various socials saying like, "Oh, it was all a ploy. He got married to a Pajit because of something. This is all part of a plan, or what?" And I'm like, or he met a nice he met a nice girl in college who happened to be Indian. In the modern world where mixed marriages aren't frowned upon, or certainly not frowned upon by everyone, and they fell in love and got married and had kids. There's also that possibility, right? Like,
I know it does sound crazy these days. I can't lie. That does sound a little crazy, but yeah, but yeah, I think there's some truth to that. What I like to tell fellows that are entering investigation, because I'm also a private investigator. What I like to tell fellows is the truth is a puzzle that assembles itself. The truth is a puzzle that assembles itself. if you start getting on the right path of an investigation, everything will fall into place with minimal effort. I am A-okay with conspiracy theories as long as they are very easy to put together. Because to me, if you're struggling to put it together, you're dealing with a box of lies. That's what you're dealing with, as far as I am concerned. In my history, and I will tell you, Jason, and I will tell you honestly, you'll forgive my immodesty, please, but I am a very deeply flawed man, and I'm happy to admit it. But you would be hard pressed to find a better investigator than I am. You would be hard pressed to find that. And I say the truth is a puzzle that assembles itself. So that's where I go with the conspiracy theories.
Well, the interesting thing too, and of course, when you're dealing with politics and a lot of these other things, one of the things that really get in your head is that everything you're seeing is produced until it's not.
Right.
I think even a lot of hot mics moments are not accidental, right? But you have to kind of weed through those things. One of the things that I've, as a bartender and working in the industry for a long time, what I know for sure is that everyone wants to tell you the truth. They
absolutely
really want to.
They do.
It might take them a few drinks, but they really want to tell you what's really deeply true to them. Because, and the more they have to cover it up, the more they want to tell you, because it's eating at them.
Yes.
And whether what they think is true is ridiculous or crazy or not, that doesn't matter. They really want to tell you. So when you hear these, the classic one is Klaus Schwab, WWF, comes out with these books outlining these plans, and anyone who reads it, you go, well, this is crazy. This is crazy talk. Why would you admit this out loud? If this is actually your opera, your mission, your OPSEC. And because really in their mind, they're not wrong. They're not bad. They're not evil.
Well,
they're
of course
doing what's
not
necessary.
Well, right. Exactly. Nobody thinks they're the villain in the piece. I mean, nobody wakes up and said, this isn't ironically, to kind of step back briefly to what you said a moment ago. Like this isn't produced. This isn't Hollywood where we're all just some cartoonish caricature. We're some villain, some pulp villain. That's not how this really works. And I'm not going to get it exactly right, but I believe it was the mother of the author of Frankenstein. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, but I believe it was her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft. Forgive me, I could be wrong, but she said something along the lines of, "No man does evil intentionally. He merely mistakes it for the good he wishes done." And I think I don't think it's true completely across the board. I do think there are bad people out there that are just selfish, that don't necessarily think it's good, but they do it to self-serve. But I don't think anybody ever really views their actions as bad either. Not maybe until ex post facto, I would say. So when it comes to things like you're saying with these grandiose plots, it's like, I believe these people because they tell me. And after a lifetime of investigation, I have learned what you have pointed out as a bartender, which is people have a story that they want to tell you. They are eager to tell you. And if you want to be, I will give you a tip. I will give you a pro tip, Jason. I'll give your audience a pro tip. If you want to be a man of mystery, if you want everybody to wonder about who you are and what you do, the easiest way to do that is always ask other people about themselves. Very rarely will they get around to ask you about you. Case in point, I knew one fellow. He was a mutual acquaintance, and I knew him for 10 years. We went to many of the same parties in college. We went to many of the same parties out of college. We went to many of the same social events, weddings, funerals, etc. And it was 10 years we knew each other. And by the end, by 10 years, he finally looked at me and said, "Wait a minute, I don't even know what the inside of your apartment looks like. Matter of fact, I only just found out where you live recently." And I just smiled and said, "Well, yeah, because you've never asked." And that's it. You will find most people are so eager to tell their story, they'll rarely ask about yours. So that goes to just what you're saying when people speak, I just believe them. Now, obviously, don't take that as I believe every Johnny come lately that makes stuff up. I'm talking about at the deeper level, like you're saying. People are eager to tell you the truth. They're eager to tell you their story. If for no other reason, then they want to hear themselves tell it to convince themselves that their actions were righteous.
Yeah, and people kind of get caught up on their contradictions too.
Mm-hmm.
It's also really easy to tell when someone's bullshitting you,
right?
Because suddenly if you're paying attention, they kind of almost want to tell you they're bullshitting you too. There's a pride aspect to it, like I'm getting one over on you.
Right.
It's funny, I guess, because I grew up around women, and I'm married with a wife, and I have a daughter, so I'm living in a feminized zone constantly,
Mm-hmm.
and you pick up on these little cues,
Mm-hmm.
and as a man, often the male brain wants to filter it out, like that's just silly talk. When you pick up on the cues, you're like, oh, there's games upon games being played here.
Yep, absolutely.
Like,
yeah. Oh, you're
right?
100% right. Matter of fact, on that note, Jason, forgive me if I cut you off.
No.
On that note, two things. First, there's an excellent book I highly recommend. It's by a man named Eric Berne, Bierne, I believe.
This isn't Men Are From Mars and Women From Venus.
No. Okay. This is the games people play. And it's not about Monopoly or Scrabble or Pokemon Go. It's about psychological games that people play with one another. So I highly recommend that if you ever have the chance, look into it. But the other thing I would say is it's interesting when you talk about subtext and you talk about women say a lot, females say a great deal, but you just have to learn to tune into it. I have said many, many times on my blogs and in coaching other men, not formally, I mean informally, talking to other men. When a woman's going to break up with you, you will know 3 months ahead of time. You will know 3 months ahead of time. If you are paying attention, you will know roughly 90 days ahead of time. Now, the problem is, are you willing to see it? And are you willing to admit you see it? That's the problem, because most guys aren't. They would tell themselves that they're not seeing it. They will tell themselves different excuses, but they are seeing it because they don't want to face the reality. And this isn't me judging those men or attacking those men, not by a long shot. I was one of them at one point, probably more than once. I was one of them. But it is something just to go into what you were saying. There are plenty of communications happening. The universe is speaking. I humbly suggest you listen to it.
This ties into something I've said numerous times, both about Vengeful Son and Civilizational Capital, and a few of the neo-trads and a few of the little things. Neo-trads is more of a hobby observation of mine, but one of the things I've said repeatedly is that these are intuitions and that are coming to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe that I'm special. I don't think I'm unique in this way. I think we're all getting these transmissions,
Mm-hmm.
and some of us get it and put it in a workable fashion. We brand it well, or we market it in a way that can be understood more effectively than others. But the general vibe, this is when now you're hearing all these things, the vibe shift. It's like people are picking up on it. They don't have the language for it yet,
right?
But it's coming. And
right.
As we're being, again, as we said at the top of the show, as people are being reintroduced to this language, there are those who will pick it up very quickly, and it's those people who will then become the models for this age of total violence.
Yes.
Where they will start to kick it off. I think Elon is the poster child for this, where he's not out there beating people up.
No.
But his rhetoric and certainly his choices on X and things like that are Vengeful Son. They're very fuck you. Don't tell me what to do. I'm tearing this thing down. You killed my son. And that, hell hath no fury as a billionaire scorned.
Yeah.
Possibly
I think
billionaire sociopath scorned. Like, bad move.
I think one of the reasons we're seeing the stirrings of the Vengeful Son, I'm going to combine your words and mine, the stirrings of the Vengeful Son, is because you're seeing a population that was decimated by abortion. You talked to Dark and Lighten about this. He's an excellently knowledgeable man on this. The generation that was decimated by abortion, that is my generation, Generation X, and I believe yours as well. I believe.
Yeah.
They're decimated. I think you're seeing this Vengeful Son start to arise because we are finally moving. The boomers are dying off enough so that we can finally begin to get our very fingertips on the lever of power. And again, as always, I choose my words meticulously. Our fingertips. I don't even think we have our hands on the lever of power, not even whole fingers, just the tips of them. And I think you have a very angry, a very bitter, and in fairness to us, I think in most cases, rightly so, but a very angry and bitter generation now coming into what they can, because we both know the boomers are never going to let go. They're going to die with their hands on that wheel. But we're going to get a very limited window of power because the millennials are way more numerous than we were. As I said, we were decimated by abortion. But I really think that's one of the reasons we're seeing the stirrings that we are right now. And I've said this on Twitter many times. I'll say it again on your program. I think what you're going to see will bring about the greatest changes. And when I say greatest in this sense, I mean largest, most sweeping. I don't necessarily mean morally best, though they could be, but I'm saying this is just more as far a scale of epicness, or in the most classic definition of the word, awesomeness. What you're going to see, what will bring about the greatest changes, is a Generation X head on Generation Z shoulders. You're going to get a Gen X president, a Gen X leader, general, whatever, and that's going to be on Gen Z shoulders. And that's when you will see everything start to change overnight. I will die on this hill. I truly believe that is what you're going to see.
I completely agree. The I think President Vance, or possibly what comes after Vance, is that's the once we get to Vance as president, and I think we will.
Mhm.
Once that happens, there's going to be a massive shift,
Mhm.
like a shift that will be historic.
Yes.
Something I've been playing around with is that, and I'm working the wording, so please forgive me if this is a bit clumsy or inaccurate, but I think right now morality is consequential. I'm not saying that it always has been, but certainly in the modern era, it is now.
Mhm.
Where because we're so divorced from tradition that we haven't dealt with the revolutionary spirit of the 18th and 19th century. We
Mhm.
haven't dealt with the Industrial Revolution. We haven't dealt with World War One, the Great Depression, and World War
Mhm.
Two. We
Mhm.
haven't dealt with those things. We
No.
think we're dealing with them by invoking them all the time, but we haven't sat down, I think, culturally and go, okay, even this idea of toxic masculinity. One of the bigger pieces I'm writing right now, and it's a bit painful because it unfortunately makes me have to be a critic of my grandfather and his whole era
Mhm.
and the men of his generation, this great generation. And you have to look at these men, uh, strip away the idolatry from the men, and look at them cleanly and go, these are broken men.
Mhm.
They were broken. They were born broken.
Mhm.
They were born in a system that had begun to divorce themselves from, let's say, traditional masculinity.
Mhm.
And whether that is good, bad, or perfect, or it's not. It's always what was, right? This
Right.
fountainhead of masculinity.
Mhm.
Then you add on two major world wars and a Great Depression, and they by the end of it all, they were on their knees. This is the generation that essentially sold their daughters into the workforce
Right.
and stood down and said, "Yeah, all right, fine." That's a betrayal of mammoth proportions.
Yes.
And I say this without condemnation, without even judgment, in the fact that they knew not what they did,
Right.
because you have to give them that leniency of somebody saying like, well, what else could they have done, right? Like when you put it all into context, it's like, yeah, okay, I get it, but that one act is such a betrayal of humanity that's what gets us to here. And this is not always just putting it on feminism or women or anything. It's not putting it on people. It's that I've said this on many shows, is that the forgiveness you can give people is that, well, what other choice could they have made? Right? When you put it in the context of the life they were living and given, and this is across all strata, from the lowest to the highest.
Right.
Yes, they're making these decisions based on the life that they're living and the life that they want to live, and then they're given these. They're trapped in this box of liberalism. So they have this limited toolbox of excuse me, of reality. There's a beer talking, and professional podcasting, folks.
Right.
And it's a tight ship with some holes, but
it's still afloat though. Keep going. It's still afloat.
We're taking on water, but we're good.
We're still going.
So, but this is what leads us to. I mean, we can get this discussion. Like, this is the remedy of the Vengeful Son. This is the remedy, I think, of liberalism itself, is to begin to model the story in the spirit of the prodigal son. The man in the story, it's the youngest son who turns away from the father in his pride, in his righteousness, takes his inheritance and moves off, says, I will carve my own path, and goes and lives his life and finds it empty and falls into a bit of ruin. Wants to return to the father, but feels so much shame for what he's done. He can't. He's blocked. And by chance meets his father on the road, and his father embraces him and brings him home and gives him, such a welcoming home that the eldest son gets a little bit jealous. He's like, this schmuck left and I stayed, and now you're exalting him. It's like, no, but this is great. He's come home. Right. He's been redeemed. And to use that analogy, I've said that if you're blaming the boomers for everything, or the great generation, or you want to place blame, you want to scapegoat, but the way to get through that is to return to the Father, in this case, to God, or to something bigger than yourself, to repent, be redeemed, and in that sense, then begin to redeem our dads. By being, not just living a better life by having more stuff, which is what the boomers did for their parents, but by being better people, by being better men, by returning to the fountainhead of masculinity, and somebody saying, "Oh, I will redeem my father, my dad," and he divorced my mom when I was young, went off, did his own thing, wasn't much of a father, wasn't present in my life. I've turned around and I've spent, now COVID helped with this, but I realized in the first year of my daughter's life, I had spent more time with her in one calendar year than my father had spent with me in 21, 22 years of my life, which was around the time that I stopped talking to him and had in contact with him. But you know what I'm saying? Like, there's that moment of tipping over.
Yeah, no, more than you think. Listen to my episode with Pete Canones, where Pete and I first sat down and spoke with one another, where we were talking about the Race Worn High School book series. I have very similar experiences as yourself. I humbly suggest you go check that out, where Pete and I are discussing Race Worn High School. I can absolutely relate. I still remember to this day, Jason. I still remember to this day. I was walking out of a bar. My father was never a big drinker. He'd have one beer and he'd go home. That was it. He just liked to socialize, and that's it. He'd have one beer and go home. And I met him in a bar when I was still a federal law enforcement officer. I stopped in. I had a drink. I had a few cigarettes. And I talked to my dad. And as we were walking out, my dad said, I was so sick of raising other people's kids that I didn't want to come home and raise my own. Because my father was a public school teacher. And I looked at him and I said, Dad, I've been waiting 32 years for you to tell me that. Because I was 32 at the time, 33. I said, I've been waiting 32 years for you to just admit that. Like you were saying, it's not even necessarily a condemnation. I mean, it was a little bit, but as I get older, it's it's just it's like you were saying earlier. You know, they keep trying to think they keep thinking they've come to terms with the past when really they're just, you know, holding a seance while the rotting body is still right next to them. And what men like yourself and myself are trying to do is hold an autopsy and go, instead of letting this corpse just rot over here, why don't we see what caused it to die, as opposed to all of you just holding hands trying to contact the spirit, you know, just constantly raising up this ghost for it to just prattle on about anything and anything you want it to say. And I think that's what men like yourself and myself are doing, as we're trying to perform this autopsy coldly, cleanly, clinically. Like you were saying, it's not even necessarily about the vengeful son from our perspective. It's not even about trying to get back at them, get one over on them. It's trying to say, how do I not make the same mistakes you made? How do I not repeat the errors of the past? And when you were saying about it being a betrayal, again, forgive me for my immodesty, but I lost my career with the federal government because I stood up, I took a stand, and I said, no, I'm not going to do this shady nonsense. And that cost me my career. I became a functional alcoholic for a long time. And I was unemployed for a very long time. And only even now am I just starting to get back out of the hole. And I will tell you, it has become, it's paradoxical for me. It has simultaneously become easier and harder for me to condemn other people. Because on the one hand, I say, you know, I made this choice, I did the right thing, and I was willing to suffer for it. Why can't you? But then on the flip side of that, I understand that that's a very difficult choice to make. You know, remember, the reason the devil is so powerful on earth is because he pays out. He pays out while you're here. Okay, now we both know you're going to pay a millionfold for what you're getting down the road, but he pays out. And that's why we have to try and look with it with a sense of forgiveness at the betrayal, instead of just a ruthless condemnation. Now, am I saying that we exonerate these people completely? No, of course not, because you have to see what went wrong. You have to perform the autopsy. You have to say, hey, you know, you wouldn't have died of cirrhosis if you stopped drinking, you know, that kind of thing. That we have to do that. But do we have, it goes back to your thing about violence. Do we have to revel in it? Do we have to take pleasure in it? No, no, we don't. And I sincerely believe it would be a bad thing if we started to revel or take pleasure in it. And I will say this to kind of tie it back into your total violence theme here. Like, there's an excellent book out there, and it's in the public domain. If you want to hunt for it, it's very easy to find. It's called "The Truth About Lynching in the South." And one of the reasons this book had such a profound effect on me as somebody in law enforcement, investigation, all that kind of stuff, is because it really lets you know, like, the concept of human justice. Because most people don't know that lynch laws in the beginning had nothing to do with killing people. Nothing to do with it. Lynching in the beginning had nothing to do with killing anybody. It was more like tarring and feathering people, running them out of the town on a rail. And then it eventually became, hey, there's no law in the area, so we have to take matters into our own hands. We have to hang you. We have to punish the cattle rustlers, horse thieves, the brigands on the road. We have to do this thing ourselves because there's nobody out here. And when you read this book, and it was written in the early 20th century, I want to say 1919, it really puts the lie to it being a racially motivated thing. Because if you read the book, it gives you all the numbers, and it says even if one adjusts for per capita, there were still way more people that were of European descent than of African descent that were lynched. Way more, even if you adjust. Because again, it was all about who was committing crimes and who wasn't. And I think that goes to why we're going to have such total violence, because that violence has been eliminated from our vocabulary for so long. And I think that is part of a grander scheme, in that, because if we leave it to the state to punish it, and somebody controls the state, then there is no punishment meted out. If you follow where I'm going with that line of thinking.
Yeah, I think the folly really was when they started to over police, let's say, simple justice. We're both Gen X. I was born in the late 70s, but growing up in the 80s as a young boy into a teenagehood, I grew up in a blue collar, very European neighborhood in the 80s, and there was violence all over the place. But it was like street violence, like fights happened, from young men to older men, and the idea that, hey, we can have a disagreement here and maybe we'll raise voices and whatever have you, but understand that if we can't find a resolution, someone's going to go to the hospital, right? Like someone's going to get a black eye, something bad's going to happen now. And I can understand why, to the liberal, to the academic, to the high-minded person who has never been in a fight, who would look at that as low-class behavior, they would want to get rid of it, tamper it out. I think that's an aspect of that smothering mother over feminized aspect of it.
Right.
But what I've always said about violence is that violence is honest.
Yes.
And there's no lying about getting punched in the face. And quite often the things that led up to that punch, you can understand them.
Right. Yeah.
Like, you may not agree with them, but you can understand how that happened.
Yeah.
And it's definitive, and it's an answer.
It works.
And yeah, it works.
I mean, it's that simple.
I think when you get rid of those things, that's when you get into now the situation of total violence, where things have gone on so far, and you've imported people, by the way, that understand violence very well.
Yes. Right.
And have no problem turning to it.
Well, and again, that's why it spirals out of control, Jason, and that because they've taken it from us, so that it's sort of like if you were never, it's sort of like when people in America turn 21. What most people in America, when they turn 21, the first thing they do is get absolutely shit-faced. Like, you were a bartender, you know that, right? In Canada, you know that. It's the first thing they do. Why? Because they really weren't exposed to it through most of their life. But if you had somebody that had a beer with his dad, maybe every so often on a camping trip or something, as somebody that grew up around alcohol, and
go to Europe, just to cut you in, but like, go to Europe when in France it's normal for 8, 9, 10, 12-year-olds, whatever it is, to have a glass of wine, like some little 2 sips of wine with dinner. And what they're doing is it's a social mimicry where, well, you're going to do this as an adult. You might as well learn it now, right? Like, and 2 sips of wine is not going to kill you. So,
Right. And the point of it, though, too, is so that you're not thrown in that, you don't have that shock value. You don't have that, oh, this is so alien, I'm finally allowed to do it, let's do it. Well, that's what the violence is, too. Whereas if
sorry, Charles, by the way, this analogy completely breaks down if you're in England at closing time.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
Because these are men who are brought up with alcohol, but at closing time, it's like a fucking frat party. like grown men getting 5 pints, because it's like the closing time is, I forget what it is now, but I think it used to be like 7 o'clock or something like that for most pubs. Like, it's early, so they just. I worked as a bartender in the UK. I can tell you this. They belly up.
I believe you.
Pretty obscene. Yeah,
I believe.
Sorry, go ahead.
But it's just a handy example. I think you get the larger point that I'm trying to make, which is by completely eliminating this option from us for so long, this violence of option, you've only made it that much more a forbidden fruit. You've only made it that much more tempting. You've only made it that much more likely for us to revel in it, because we haven't seen what it's like up close. We haven't seen the real effects. Like when you hang a man and he shits himself because his bowels go slack. It's like, that's violence. That's the real world. Or when you misjudge his weight and his head comes off. I mean, like that's violence. And you learn to understand that there are times to do these things and times not to do these things. Whereas if you've never been around it, you just get that lashing out and you don't understand what you're actually doing to other human beings. Which, by the way, there's an excellent book I also recommend, and it's called My Experience as an Executioner by James Berry. And again, that's in the public domain. You can get it. And he talks about what it's like to have to execute people for the state for crimes. And all this is just to say what you were getting at. And also, that I was trying to point out that this is why we're going to see that lashing out, just that swinging of fists, coming out swinging, that not a surgical strike, but just a shrieking through the living room with a stick, with a board with a nail in it. That's what we're going to see.
Yeah, which is why it's more dangerous.
Yes,
because you couple that in with that idea that it's going to feel good and it's going to feel righteous. Is something that Pete's talked about is that, and I'll be careful on YouTube, but I agree with his prediction that you might start seeing people swinging from overpasses. Be it, I think initially it was the idea that it might be the Troons themselves, but I think it's going to be the doctors. Because here's the thing that I've said that the right wing is going to have to contend with. The world's going to have to contend with.
Mm-hmm.
In about 5-10 years, you are going to have a generation, and we're talking sizable numbers now, of young kids who've been fed puberty blockers, and were told by trusted authorities that they were the wrong gender and that they should mutilate themselves. Now, and I'm talking in the West, it's hard to get these numbers, but apparently the black market trade for puberty blockers is massive.
I shudder to imagine.
Right. So let's get conservative and say throughout the entire West, in the Anglosphere alone, right? We're talking maybe 500,000 people, kids, 13-year-olds now being fed this. In 5-10 years, they wake up, the vibe has changed, the Vengeful Son is here, and they're angry. And they have every damn reason in the world to be angry. Angry at their parents, angry at the medical institutions, angry at their therapists, angry at the entire everything that has fed them this lie. And they have to live it for the rest of their lives. I can move back to Canada, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there are choices we make that, okay, you get a dumb tattoo, you can remove it or whatever, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say too, what do they have to lose at that point? I mean,
Nothing.
that's the real fear. Like, what do they have to lose? And the answer is about as close to nothing as humanly possible. I mean, they don't even have themselves. Like you could make the pat argument in a lot of situations. Well, Jason, if everything falls apart, you've still got you. You know what I mean? But they don't. They don't. They're only going to be finding out who they are at that point, and that everything they've been sold is a lie. And it's just, that's going to be unimaginably horrific. If only, let's just say, well, let's use your number, 500,000. Let's use that number. If only 1% does something about it, 1%, how many real problems is that going to create?
Yeah,
Right?
that's what gives me, and I don't want to be blackpilling. I think we can get to
I'm not
good stuff here, but I'm just it's that's what gives me pause, and that's also why, and I understand. And look, I've spoken very clearly on this issue many times, and my position of it is very clear. So I brook no sympathy for the people who've done this to kids.
I'm with you.
That being said, the kids themselves, we're going to have a plan, or formulate a plan on how to give them a place to go. that's not destructive, self-destructive or otherwise, you know. And does that mean we condone? And no, right? Forgiveness and love is not condoning. This is part of the redemption. It's like they have to be brought to a point of where they can repent, and so they can be redeemed. Right. And we have to give them the space for that, because if not, then we're just sitting back. We're no, I wouldn't say we're no better, but we're just part of their hell. You know.
Yeah, I was just going to say, how would we be that much less cruel if we didn't? I mean, those people gave them lies, and we're just giving them iciness. I mean, I don't. And you also have to keep in mind, and again, this isn't to condone anything. I'm with you 100%. I'm not condoning anything. But you also have to understand, where were these people when they made that decision? Where were they in their lives? How old were they? What were they going through? I mean, most likely you're dealing with very troubled people off the mark. You're most likely dealing with very young people off the mark. You're dealing with people that have had a lie machine in their hands or in front of their face just about 24 hours a day in the form of a tablet or a cell phone, and people that make literally billions of dollars lying to them. Like I mean, if that's not being set up for failure, I don't know what is. I mean, every institution has collapsed before they were even born, because I'm 51, and I would argue, most of the institutions were collapsed when I was born. You know, I would argue that most of them were already really fallen, or what's the word I want?
Compromised.
Compromised. Thank you. That's exactly the word I want. Thank you. They were already compromised, if not absolutely collapsed. So all this is to say, TLDR, I do think they are deserving of Christian mercy, not tolerance, but mercy. The tolerance and mercy are not the same things. I can still completely disagree with your decisions. I can still completely disagree with your actions, but that doesn't mean that I don't have some Christian mercy for you as well. But again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier about total violence. You have to be careful. Remember, when Christ returns, it's going to be with a sword. You know, what I like to say when people say, oh, well, what would Jesus do? I like to say, kill millions with a word, because that's what he's going to do, according to Revelations. Yeah, it's like we keep forgetting that this is not a pacifistic faith, but we also have to understand that it's not a murderous psychopath one either. We have to have some charity. We have to have some mercy. That's what's continually bringing me back further and further to my Catholic faith, is that I'm realizing it's like my pride was my problem. I had to realize a lot of these guys had it figured it out long before I did, long before I was even a thought. And you just have to learn that balance, especially as a man. Violence is necessary. You need to learn that language. However, it's like the language of Mordor. You should never want to speak it. If you can avoid speaking it, don't. But there will be some times where you must. And when you do, speak quickly, speak clearly, speak decisively, and then be silent.
Let's do I be for a bit longer, Charles? I don't want to keep
Yeah, by all means. Yeah, absolutely.
Let's get into the and thank you again for everyone who's watching and participating. I have another ad reads. I'll add them in post. But do check out the links in the channel below, how you can support the channel, and our affiliates and people who help make this show happen. I appreciate each and every one of you. Let's get to the Fix It monologue, where you became a little minor internet famous there for a bit, Charles. And you know, those are always weird little moments, but you had a little we'll call it monologue on Peter Canona's show about, and I think this kind of dovetails into where we're at. We're increasingly now where we're at now. Right. Almost how the Vengeful Son will go online is when women turn to their men selectively or collectively and say to them quietly, fix it.
Yes.
The world is broken. You need to go fix it. And I'm going to paraphrase you, and please expand. You know, I don't care how you do it. I'm not going to ask any questions. You need to fix it. And I remember hearing that monologue. I was like, that's it.
Yeah.
And I can start to see it now in the rumblings just around me. Again, I live in a very feminized society and around a lot of women, and there's this, and no one's saying it, right?
No. Well, it's
Explicitly, but
subtext,
it's
Jason. It's subtext, like you were talking about with your wife and your daughter. It's subtext. That's what it is. I'm sorry, I didn't cut you off. I just wanted to say
no,
that I wanted to
no.
bring
Go ahead.
attention to
No,
the fact that
please.
no one was saying it. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's well. I mean, you've done my monologue quite well for me. I really don't even need to do it, but I mean, I'll expand on it if you like. I'll continue.
please
Yeah,
do.
that's what it is. It's I come up with that years ago, back when I was writing a quote unquote red pill blog, the one I mentioned earlier, 80 Proof Oinomancy. And I said, we really need to get women on our side. And I was pilloried. Oh my goodness, was I pilloried from every angle. Oh, you're crazy. You're a cuck. You're a simp. How can you have this men's blog and say this? And I'm getting, you guys just aren't getting it. I didn't say we need them to be in positions of leadership. That's not what I said. I never said that. I speak meticulously. I choose my words very carefully. I said we just need them on our side, because what it's going to take, what's going to become necessary is for them to reach their limit. And remember, between men and women, women are far more ruthless than men, far more ruthless. And I think it's because they don't have the language of violence at their fingertips necessarily. They don't have to suffer the effects of it as much as men do. If you and I have a disagreement in the street, it's much more likely we're going to punch each other in the face than you're going to hit a woman that you disagree with in the street. In the Western world, that's very unlikely that you're going to raise a hand against a woman. Very unlikely, right? So they don't really have the language for violence that we have. So they will be very happy to go to it when it becomes necessary. When their world is changing for the negative, they will be happy to flip that switch, to turn that dial, to press that button. And when they finally have had enough, when they reach what I call their save point, and I'll explain that a little bit later, when they reach what I call their save point, to allude to video game terminology, when they reach their save point, they're going to turn to the men in their lives, husbands, brothers, fathers, sons, and they'd be like, fix it. I don't care what you have to do. I don't want to know. I'm not going to ask. And don't come home and tell me. Just go out and fix it. I'll be here changing the baby's diaper. I'll be here getting our daughter ready for school. I'll be brushing her hair. I'll be doing the laundry. I'll be doing the dishes. I'll be making the bed. You go out there and you fix it. This is my place. That's yours. You straighten it out. That's why I have you. And most men at that point will be like, got it. I'm going to do it. Because how this world generally runs is my life is ruled by the Pareto principle. And I would say this is probably even too generous, but I'll say it anyway. 20% of men will really take it upon themselves to do something. But when you have the state the way it is, the regime the way it is now, very few men are going to want to risk it because they're throwing away their lives for nothing. 80% of men just wait for what women want done to tell them. 80% of men just wait. I just want my wife to tell me what she needs, and then I just want to go back to my football game, my television show, whatever. And this isn't even to slam those men. This isn't about a personal judgment. I'm just talking about how the world works. 80% of men.
The male lion only gets activated when the hyenas get too numerous, right? He gets activated at certain points to come in and lay down the law, and then go back to snoozing and whatever the hell he does.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Right. I just want to not be misunderstood. This isn't my personal hobby horse to attack any particular group. I'm just saying how I perceive things the chips are going to fall. And it's going to be when enough women get together and say, we're done. I'm tired of getting catcalled on my way to work. I'm tired of our daughter getting groped on the way to school. I'm tired of them trying to trans my son. That's it. I'm done. Fix it. And when you take that chain off of men, boy howdy, that's when you're going to see things change. And that's what you're starting to see. You're starting to see the smothering mother let up. and let the son do what he needs to do. Now, maybe it's going to be good, maybe it's going to be bad. I suspect you're right that it's going to be a whole lot of both. But we're seeing the smothering mother finally realize that she's hit her save point, that she doesn't want to see things go lower than they already are, and she needs you to stop that decline.
Yeah, I mean, part of the motif of that archetype is that the smothering mother or the devouring mother is the perpetual victim. So in many ways, she sets up encounters or positions where she will be victimized so that she can always be the suffering one, right? So it's where she gains sympathy and power. And that's fine when it's still almost theoretical. Like there's a suffering, like to kind of build on your point. There's that point where it's like, okay, well, this isn't like theatrics anymore. You know, this isn't just like someone getting gang raped in India. Oh no, it happened to our neighbor. Oh, it happened to our daughter. Oh, it happened, like when the immediacy starts to hit home, that's and your 20 degrees of separation becomes 6 or 2. That's when things really start to change.
Right.
And I think that, again, to be a little less evergreen about it, was certainly what we're seeing in Britain. Now, we're also seeing the effects of the smothering mother in government, where these people are selected not to be effective good men, but to be corrupt and to turn blind eyes, to be weak and easily led. And when you see a weak man try to be strong, they always enact the same policies, which is, we've seen we'll see how things play out, but it looks like they're going to go into a police state scenario in Britain. And I think throughout the West, you're going to see attempts at this anyways. The bitter white pill from my perspective is that they have no more civilizational capital to do this with. Like the police states have never worked because the investment is massive.
Yes. Right.
And it doesn't produce anything other than more police state. And you can't run a civilization on security alone. Like
yes,
everything else falls apart behind it.
Yes, you're 100% correct. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And so even if they do this, it's just going to accelerate the demise of that civilization. One of the things I've said on Twitter quite a bit is like, you don't live in a civilization anymore. It looks like you do.
Yes.
Right. The trains run and you have all these wonderful fancy toys.
Right.
But foundationally, we're not building any of this civilizational capital to keep this thing together, which manifests more civilization. And as we're starting to see these things break down and fall apart, it's more and more evident that we're not in just a late stage liberalism. We're in late stage civilization. And that's a very dangerous place to be. And also it also opens up a whole bunch of opportunities.
Yes.
Because this is where you can get, as we get into the end point of the show, let's get some hopefulness in here.
Yeah, no problem.
Because we've been bereft of it. But but this is where the messaging comes into. We need to build.
Right. And I would say another thing I have on Twitter that is out there that I said, societies in decline are obsessed with sex because they reek of death. That's on my Twitter, right? Because they are now sterile. They don't build anything. They don't gestate anything. They don't grow anything. We have become a barren womb, one giant barren womb, and that's the horror of it. Like that's where we are now. However, when you were, I'll try and start white pilling your audience a little bit. When we talk about they're going to burn this thing to the ground, they're going to burn it to ashes. Well, remember, forest fires have to happen so that new greenery can sprout. That's why California is such a joke, because they don't understand that forest fires have to happen. You can't just constantly prevent them. You have to do it in a certain way. You have to let them burn in a certain way. I mean, Europe knows that because they tamed their woodlands for 1,000 years, 2,000 years. And I mean, in all this negativity and all the violence, I sincerely, and I say this with 100% honesty, my heart on my sleeve. I think within the next 100 years, I won't presume any more accurate a statement, any more finite a timeline than that. But within the next 100 years, I think you are going to see beauty that we haven't seen in the last 100 years. I sincerely believe that. I really do. Because remember, one of the best things about Alcoholics Anonymous is you admit that you have a problem and then you can start getting better. Well, now we're at the part where we're slowly starting to admit, hey, maybe I'm an alcoholic, right? So at the end of the day, you can only go up. You can only go up. And I know a lot of guys are saying, no, it can get way worse. You don't understand. But what I say to them is, worse in what way? What, I don't have more Chinese gadgets? What, I don't have more video games? I don't have more, whatever you want, like drugs? I don't know what we're talking about. Like, worse in what way? I don't have more modern conveniences? Or are we talking about now I might actually find a woman that loves me and needs me because she doesn't feel safe, which is historically how love blossomed, because women are attracted to power and safety. So it's like, okay, so what? Now I might actually have children that are my own. Now I might actually see the sunshine and touch grass. Now I might have a job that makes something instead of just pushes paper from the left side of a desk to the right side of the desk. What are we talking about getting worse exactly?
Yeah, we need to burn Margaritaville down to the ash, to the foundations,
right,
and salt the earth,
right,
instead of the rim of the glass. Salt the earth on Margaritaville.
I like that
because it's cursed and diseased as a concept.
Yes,
right. This idea of retiring at 65 and doing what with your fucking life?
Right.
Like ignoring your children, going on lifelong cruises,
right,
is to me so anti-human that, the only thing I would like about cruises, and I want to retain them, is I would love to enact a program where every 3.5 years, we won't get rid of democracy. We'll augment it, right? We'll fortify it by putting a whole bunch of people, right, on these cruise ships around the 3.5 year mark, and just sending them out, to the Caribbean, where they can go get their hair braided, right, and go enjoy cultural artifacts and buy some seashell necklaces for $45.
Where you were going.
and they can vote. There's a vote. They write their little thing down on a piece of paper and it goes into this magical box. And for sure, we're going to send that off. And don't worry, it counts. It's all good. And you'll come back around, in around, I don't know, February, maybe a bit later if you're living in the north, and it'll be fine. And who won? Who knows? What do you look? There's another cruise to look forward to.
Yeah, exactly. Another 3.5 years, another cruise to look.
You have all your slides you can show your friends.
Love it.
Wear your tan, Dorothy. Come on. Talk about the time you drank that thing out of the coconut shell. It's wonderful. Just shut the fuck up. Leave it alone. It's going to be okay. Yeah. It's, someone's in office. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. Just go through your digital photos one more time. Come on, just go.
Show us all. I'll sit through it too.
Right.
Just to get them off the voting dock. I'm like, okay, here we go. Yeah,
hey, show me when you went to Cancun
again, huh?
for the 19th. Oh my God, we said the same one. show me for the
Turks and Caicos. Oh, good. Yeah. Oh, he spoke really good English. Oh, that's good.
Their patronizing little way too. Like, he was pretty smart for an Ecuadorian. Oh well, hey, thanks. You know what I mean? That was great. Way to go.
He could speak Spanish and Ecuadorian. Oh, really?
Well, yeah.
Good. Yeah. Charles, thank you so much, man. Well, let's we'll wrap her up. Tell the people you have books and books out.
I do.
You've been making the rounds on the podcast circuit a little bit. I'm happy to be one of your host platforms. I don't know what this is, but what the right terminology is. But and thank you again to Don and everyone else going in the chat. This is being broadcast live in our members only on YouTube. We'll be hitting the main on Friday at around 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for all those who keep track of these things. But please, Charles, tell us your work. Tell us how people can support you, finance you, or consume more of your words.
At the moment, I don't have anything like Patreon or anything, but I would humbly ask that if you're interested, please look into Whiskey and Ashes and Inebriates Avowals, Maxims, and Observations. You'll find that on Amazon. I would also ask if you're going through a severe depression, anxiety, anything like that. I would also ask that you look for the Holistic Guide to Suicide. It's all about combating suicidal ideation, trying to get your life back on track from trauma, trying to get your life back on track from depression. And in all honesty, I ask you to look into that one, please, for your own well-being. It's not written by some egghead that sits in an ivory tower. It's talking about a man that's already admitted to Jason and in his audience that I was a functional alcoholic for quite some time. I endured a great many tragedies, trials, and tribulations. This is not somebody just coming on high with giving you some platitudes. This is all stuff that I did, that I learned the hard way to get out of it. And I would like you to look into that book if you need it, not because I want your $5 or whatever I make off of it, because I wrote it to help people. Yes, of course, I take the money if they send me the check, but I wrote it to help people. And I mean that with the utmost sincerity. I truly, truly do. If for nothing else, I find it far more valuable to know that my suffering had a point in helping other men and possibly women, than any kind of financial reimbursement. As far as where you can find me, if you'd like to hear me more, you can see me on Twitter at Whiskey and Ashes at Twitter, and I'm a frequent, if not very often, I'm a frequent guest, a regular guest rather. I think that's a better way to say it. I'm a regular guest on the Pete Canonis Show. I am part of the Thought Crime Syndicate. We do a show every month where I am blessed to be on with Pete and Dark Enlightenment and Jose Nino, all of which are brilliant men and a lot of fun to talk to, great guys off and on the air. So that's where I can be found, and I look forward to speaking with Jason again. I had a blast. Thank you very much, Jason, for having me. It really was a treat.
Absolute pleasure, sir. As I said to you before, I was really looking forward to this one. Yeah, it was exactly as I hoped it would be. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Charles, stick around for a little bit. We'll talk about it after the show. Thank you very much, and we will see you again soon.